Hi, this is Paul Friedman, founder of the Marriage Foundation, and in this video what I'm going to do is I'm going to read verbatim a question. In this case it's not a question, but it's a complaint from a therapist. Now this is many years ago. I don't even mind using her real name, but I won't, because I don't want it to become a confrontation between the two of us. But I'm going to read her message and then I'm going to respond. She's very sincere. Bear in mind that although I do not believe that traditional marriage counseling is equipped to help people in their marriages, I do believe that those who try are very sincere, and some are helpful, but for the most part they're not, because they're using. Anyway, let me get into this. This is a counseling request, and you can put in a counseling request to the Marriage Foundation too. Just go to our website, themarriagefoundation.org, and you'll see the tab. So this is from Dr. Deb / Dear Mr. Friedman, that's me. I am so sorry for your unfortunate history with poor quality marriage counseling. Talk about pandering, huh? However, I would like to suggest that sweeping statements may do more harm than good. For example, you say, quote, the efforts of just one spouse can transform a troubled marriage, end of quote. This position may keep a victim, I'm doing this, a victim of emotional abuse in a marriage, thinking she, usually but not always a she, can fix it. A spouse who is unable to feel empathy, for example, will not respond well to one spouse's efforts. Another incorrect statement is, traditional marriage counseling is based in psychology and considers a troubled marriage to be a mental health problem, i.e., a psychological disorder. It is not. And then she puts the quote, which I don't really understand. Psychology is traditionally a process of working with individuals. Traditional marriage counseling is a field that traditionally works with couples and is rooted in a field called marriage and family therapy. As if I didn't know. There are quite a few models within this field, but all of the people in it are well trained to help save marriages. Nonsense. Wishing you the best. Keep up the good work, but please correct the errors. You may be preventing someone from getting the help they need. So I'm going to address her comments in the order that she delivered them. So we'll start with Dear Mr. Friedman. Thank you. I'm so sorry for your unfortunate history with poor quality marriage counseling. I admit it. When I was married for 20 years, which ended in '96, and I had lots of money. I wasn't like Bill Gates wealthy, but I did really well in business. And my wife and I went to a minimum of a dozen of the best marriage counselors in the San Diego, California area. And to say that it was a waste of time would be doing them a service. It hurt our marriage. In fact, some of the instruction we got was so devastating to our marriage that it just kept pushing us further and further towards a divorce. My experiences are not unique. No, not at all. We hear from people all the time who have had the same experiences. Why? Why? And she basically says why later on. She says, there are quite a few models within this field. Well, she needs to be corrected. There are as many models as there are therapists. There are no standard protocols when it comes to healing marriages. I had a standard protocol when I met with couples, and I moved it away from meeting with couples. Why? Because when you go into a session, because of human nature, you are automatically going to be competing against the person you should be looking for ways to get closer to. But the initial meetings with a therapist are all about your childhood. Sometimes it depends on the model, but they always start with, so what's going on? Well, you're going to have your perspective. Your husband or your wife will have their perspective. And you're going to want to be sure that your perspective is better than their perspective, that your complaints, because it's always complaints, are heard more than theirs. Isn't that true? Think about it. And trust me, I've seen it, which is why when I started meeting with couples, I stopped meeting with couples after 1 or 2 sessions. And those sessions were not used to find out what their problems were. So, I'd like to suggest that sweeping statements may do more harm than good. For example, you say the efforts of just one spouse can transform a troubled marriage. Why shouldn't I use a sweeping statement like that if it is absolutely true? We've been doing this now close to 20 years. And by the way, in between my business and starting this, I was a divorce mediator. All my clients came from therapists. So I saw plenty of failures that shouldn't have been failures. And I started to realize that the efforts of one spouse is the way to go. Now, sometimes the 2 spouses will individually take it on, but it's not necessary. In most cases, and I mean way most, one spouse is enough, because that one spouse is ready to take it on. The other spouse may just think, he's just being an idiot, she's just being an idiot. And one of you has the idea, I'm going to do something about this now. In order to really make changes, positive changes, because that's what you need to do, right? You don't need to correct stuff that is in the past, it's done. You need to make positive changes in yourself, in the context of your marriage, that will influence your spouse. An influenced spouse in a positive way will respond in a positive way. I mean, this is just common sense. To me, and probably to you, but somehow well-intentioned people don't get this. Some of them. So the efforts of just one spouse can transform a troubled marriage is absolutely accurate. Absolutely. And we have the proof. We have thousands and thousands of people who have taken the course for men or the course for women. Their spouse did not. And when you take one, you can sign up your spouse later at a very discounted rate, and that happens a lot. It's a true statement, and she's just wrong. This position may keep a victim of emotional abuse in marriage thinking she, usually but not always a she, can fix it. I want to tell you that using a scare tactic like this is offensive and preposterous. there isn't that much victim of emotional abuse in marriage cases. But what happens is, when you're not happy in your marriage, the first thing you want to do is blame your spouse. It's not your fault, it's their fault. And they come up, who's they? The Western psychological therapists, they come up with these trendy causes for unhappiness in marriage. Right now, the big trendy cause is I'm emotionally abused. Emotionally abused. What a BS term. Not to the ones who are truly abused, but who's to say what emotionally abused really means? Usually it means I'm worn out, I can't handle what's coming at me, and I need tools to do that. You can't change your spouse. You just can't. But you can influence them in a way where they will want to change. So how we do it at the Marriage Foundation is very simple. We give you the tools so that you could set yourself up above what you now perceive as attacks. You don't have to be abused. Emotionally abused is nonsense. Now, if you're physically abused, that's different. In most cases, get out now. But if you think you're emotionally abused, you're mostly just worn out. And you're probably emotionally abusing, in her case, where she says it's mostly a she. I disagree with that, by the way. Men are also abused. But it's by your own way of receiving information. So our way is to teach you how to separate the wheat from the chaff, you might say. How to make sure that what you're hearing is not received as an attack. And that you rise above the incidents and you get into love. You rise above these mundane things. And it's so effective. It's so effective. And we have many people who come to us and say, I feel emotionally abused. Yeah, because that's what you're reading about in the articles and the magazine articles, and you're hearing these fancy dance doctors of psychology talking about it on talk shows. It's mostly nonsense. I hate to say it, but it is mostly nonsense, and I'm sorry. And if you're offended by that, then what I say to you is get into our stuff and prove it to yourself using our processes. So you're not a victim. Because what she's saying is, a spouse who is unable to feel empathy, for example, will not respond well to one spouse's efforts. So then, what should you do? Her suggestion implies then you got to get away from him or her. That's crazy. That's crazy. Why end the marriage? You know, the Western psychological world has been doing therapy for marriages for about 100 years. In that time, divorce has gone up 300%. Less people are getting married. Obviously, they don't know what they're talking about. So she's absolutely wrong about that. Another incorrect statement is, from her point of view, traditional marriage counseling is based on psychology and considers a troubled marriage to be a mental health problem. And I don't remember ever saying that exactly. So let me, for the record, straighten this out. Traditional marriage counseling is based in Western psychological thinking. It's a better way of saying it, actually. But maybe when I wrote this, maybe it's in one of my books, it was a long time ago, and I've refined a lot of, none of the principles have changed, but I have refined how I say things over the years. I admit that. So what is wrong with that? Really, she's offended by that. What is wrong with it from my point of view? Well, Western psychology does not include the fact that you are a soul who has a mind. Now, some people say, oh, well, you're religious. Well, whether I am religious or not is really nobody's business, but I do acknowledge the reality that we as a consciousness possess our mind. We are not our mind, and there is the rub. They think you are the mind, and then what flows from them are things like love is an abstract thought. Well, I gotta tell you, that means it's imagination, by the way. Love is not an abstract thought. Love is the one true reality. Of all things that we consider to be real, love is real. Because the mind can't wrap itself around it, doesn't mean that it's abstract. It just means that it is metaphysical, not physical. It's not material. Proof of that. Proof of that. You've gone to a wedding, and you're sitting there, and all of a sudden, and this happened every time you've gone to any wedding, all of a sudden you feel this upwelling of love. It is so powerful. You can't touch it. You can't smell it, taste it, see it, or hear it. It's not of your senses. And your mind cannot handle it. And it feels so right. Why? Because it is the reality. It is the one thing that we human beings crave above all other things, because we are essentially souls. We possess a body, we possess a mind, but we have to have this feeling, and it's a different kind of feeling than emotional. We have to have this feeling of love present in our lives. Now, not too long ago, one of my heroes, Steve Jobs, passed away. Guy was broken. This guy had everything. Power, money, influence. He had it all. But he said, I never had that connection. He didn't understand what he really meant by that connection. He didn't have that feeling of love. Because we don't all have to have that connection with a partner, but it's a great way to do it. I mean, there's saints and sages and monks and nuns who have that feeling of love without being married. But marriage is the greatest vehicle for having that. But you got to know how. And if you use the Western psychological models, you'll never get there from here, because they consider love to be an abstract thought. And I have trained hundreds of these people, and they all have the same bad training. Not too long ago, I said to one of my friends, who's a therapist, very good therapist, because he doesn't follow them, he follows us now. And I said, what about Maslow? And anyone who's taken Psych 101 knows about Maslow, a hierarchy of needs. Nonsense. And he goes, well, we change. And I go, what about Freud? He goes, yeah, even Freud. In other words, they're not scientific. They don't scrutinize the theories that they come up with. They don't test them. They do these studies, but they manipulate the results. So it's all over the place. So they don't have definite systems and protocols to help couples. They do not. Now we will be starting, I have to, because our organization's gotten so big, and we're going to need to train a lot of therapists. And we're going to train them, and they're all going to have the same protocols for working with people. And what defines a protocol? In our case, at the Marriage Foundation, it's to take you from where you are to the promises of marriage, which are happiness that is ever increasing and love that is ever expanding. That is why you got married. It's why I got married. It's why we all get married, so we could experience this. And as human beings, it's our birthright to be happy. And we live in a cause and effect world, but if you're not educated as to what causes create the results you want, you're not going to get there. And what I say is true. You go into these therapeutic sessions and they're bitch and moan sessions. And they don't work. And statistically, they don't work. Their success rate is below 10%, way below 10%. And how they measure their success now is whether people like them or not. Well, I don't care if you like me or not. You come to the Marriage Foundation for help. I only care about one thing. And the counselors who work for us only care about one thing, and that is your success. And how do you measure success? Really simple. Are you happier today than you were yesterday? And will you be tomorrow because you're following our processes? And are you experiencing love the way you're supposed to? Then she says, psychology is traditionally a process of working with individuals. I don't want to work with you. I want to show you. I mean, I'm splitting hairs with semantics, but it's true. What they do is they work with individuals and work and work and work and get nowhere. Traditional marriage counseling is a field that traditionally works with couples, and that's why it fails, for the reasons I told you before. And it's rooted in a field called marriage and family therapy. Oh, wow. You give it a good name, and that doesn't mean diddly. Doesn't mean it works. It doesn't work. There are quite a few models within this field, but all of the people in it are well trained to help save marriages. BS. BS. They're not. And I've worked with these people. I'm going to tell you what happened when I started working with my first batch of therapists. And I'll take you right through this so you understand where I'm coming from. Because I'm not into slamming people, but I am into changing the world when I can. I am. I admit it. I don't complain about it. Well, maybe a little, but I prefer to change it. So we were already moving along and helping people. And I thought, okay, I should train some therapists. So I had the person who worked for me, Kathy Rose, call 125 marriage therapists in San Diego, California. When was this? It was 2012 or something. Anyway, she called them and I said, ask them one question. And this is a question that is important. If I'm going to help somebody become a counselor for us, they need to understand a basic idea. So I said, ask them whether they believe they are a soul or they have a soul. And come on, that's a thought-provoking question, right? Are you a soul or do you have a soul? But for a therapist who's doing this day in and day out, they should readily give the right response. And the right response is, I am a soul. What I have is I have a body and I have a mind. And so she did that, and I don't remember how many people she found, but I went to visit all of those who answered correctly. Visited them, gave them my book. I said, please read this. I'm going to start training therapists. And if you like what you read, I gave them Breaking the Cycle. I ended up with 25 in my class. And good people, initially. You know, you learn about people as you go along. My class went down to 13. I fired most of them because they were only interested in money. They wanted to add a new arrow to their quiver. And I'm into saving marriages. So I thought, incorrectly, that understanding of the mind is like the first step to become a therapist. So I thought, okay, my first class will just go through how the mind works, what it is, da-da-da, and then we could move on to the other stuff. And I'm into the first class for, I don't remember, 20, maybe 30 minutes of explaining the mind, doing diagrams on the whiteboard. And I turn to them and they're all like, and I go, you're familiar with all this, right? No, they were not. They had learned this crazy stuff that is almost designed to confuse you. The id, the ego, the superego, the consciousness, subconsciousness. Irrelevant stuff if you're trying to save your marriage. But the way I teach about the mind, you need to learn that when you're married, because it's your mind and you need to learn how to control it and how it's trying to deceive you and how it's working you and how your subconscious memories are leading into misinformation that you're now using to calculate and to envision things. It took 3 weeks before they understood how the mind works. Once they saw it, it was like, yeah, I get this. Marriage therapists, most 99% of therapists don't understand how the mind works, and you gotta know. So, they are not well trained. They don't understand, and so they have failures. I wish Dr. Deb the best, but she's closed-minded to the reality. And I understand that. She has a doctor in front of her name. It's only a PhD. It's not the same kind of designation as someone who becomes an MD, where empirical knowledge is built upon. In the psych community, there is no empirical knowledge. In our process, there actually is. Studies don't mean anything. What means something to you, if your marriage is in trouble, is what works. How will I get from here, wherever that here happens to be, to happiness and ever increasing, ever expanding love? How do I get from here to there? And our system takes you there fast. It's efficacious, it's efficient, it works. And you could read all our reviews if you want to see what other people have experienced. So, this is what we're up against at the Marriage Foundation. I intend to change the world with this, because it's not only for marriage counseling that we have a problem. They completely push aside anything that even hints of being spiritual, which is so insane. Why would we allow the tail to wag the dog? Why should we let these people make good people feel bad because they believe in God, because they believe in a moral code, because they believe that we are essentially spiritual beings? No. Your marriage is amazing. It's amazing, but you don't know how to drive it. And this is what we teach you. Thank you for spending time with me. I am Paul Friedman. I founded the Marriage Foundation, and I founded it to be of service to you. God bless you, and take care. Thank you.